The morning it all began. Leona Bryce found a receipt. It was tucked inside the lining of Fletcher's winter coat, the one she'd pulled from the hall closet to bring to the dry cleaner. A receipt from the Aldwyn Hotel on West 44th Street. 2 nights, a suite. Dated the same weekend Fletcher told her he was at a partner's retreat in Boston. She stood in the kitchen, holding it for a long time. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She set it on the granite counter next to her coffee mug and stared at it, the way you stare at something you already knew was coming but still weren't ready to see. 10 years of marriage, a house she loved, a daughter, Wren, who was 8 years old and currently upstairs brushing her teeth before school. Leona folded the receipt, slid it into the pocket of her cardigan, and kissed Wren on the forehead when she came downstairs. "You okay, Mom?" Wren asked, the way kids do when they sense something adults are trying to hide. "Perfect," Leona said. "Eat your toast." She drove Wren to school, smiled at the crossing guard, and drove home. Then she sat in her car in the driveway of their 4-bedroom colonial on Birchwood Lane and made a decision. She was not going to fall apart. Not yet. She was going to find out exactly what was happening before she said a single word. What Leona didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Fletcher had already been 3 steps ahead of her for months, and the house she was about to walk back into was not just her home. It was a trap. Leona Bryce had not always been this quiet. 10 years ago, she had a byline in the Atlantic and a voice that could hold a room. She covered financial corruption, interviewed federal prosecutors, and once spent 6 weeks in Phoenix tracking a story on fraudulent property seizures that led to 3 convictions. She was relentless, precise, and fearless. Then she met Fletcher at a charity gala in Tribeca. He was brilliant and attentive and made her feel, for the first time in years, like someone was truly listening. They married after 14 months. When she got pregnant with Wren, she took a leave of absence from work. Then the leave stretched. Then Fletcher suggested that with his income, there was no reason for her to rush back. Then the years moved the way years do when you're not watching, quickly and without mercy. Now Leona's days looked like this: school drop-offs, grocery runs, dinner at 7, silence by 9. Fletcher worked late most evenings. He was always polite, always clean, always slightly absent. She had stopped asking where he went because the answers were always the same, and she was tired of not believing them. She had tried to go back to writing twice. Both times, something happened. A family trip Fletcher planned without telling her. A school event that needed her. A deadline that Fletcher dismissed as not really the right time. She never pushed hard enough. She'd lost the habit of trusting herself. Her neighbor, Sylvie Cruz, a retired family court judge who had seen the inside of more broken marriages than she could count, once said to Leona over coffee, "The quietest women are usually the ones with the most to say. When they finally speak, the room shakes." Leona had smiled and changed the subject. She was still learning what Sylvie already knew. She was still learning that the careful, controlled woman she'd become was not weakness. It was inventory. That evening, Fletcher came home at 9:15 and said he had been in a deposition. Leona served the dinner she had kept warm and watched him eat without looking up from his phone. "How was your day?" she asked. "Fine," he said. This was their marriage. 2 people passing through the same rooms without ever actually meeting in them. She had learned to read him in the way you learn to read weather, not because you want to, but because you have to know what's coming. Tonight, he was clipped, distracted, His suit jacket stayed on. He finished eating, rinsed his plate, and retreated to his home office on the second floor. Leona waited until she heard the click of his office door. Then she walked to the living room and stood still. She had been in this room 10,000 times. She knew every corner, every piece of furniture, the bookshelves Fletcher insisted on when they renovated, the antique clock his mother had given them, the area rug from a trip to Santa Fe she barely remembered anymore. Everything in this room had been chosen by Fletcher, arranged by Fletcher, approved by Fletcher. She looked at the clock. It was a beautiful thing. Dark wood, brass face, a gift that had always felt slightly out of place because it was too formal for the rest of the room. Fletcher had positioned it on the middle shelf himself and told her not to move it because the vibration would throw off the mechanism. She had never questioned that. Now, standing in the silence, she looked at the clock and felt something she could not name. Unease, the kind that doesn't have a reason yet. She moved closer. The clock ticked steadily. The shelf behind it was just a shelf. Books she had read, a small ceramic bowl from their trip to Maine. Nothing unusual. She turned away. She didn't find the device that night. But across town, in the corner office of Bryce and Hollis LLP on Park Avenue, Fletcher was reviewing files on his MacBook Pro, and one of those files was a folder labeled simply LB Audio. It contained 47 recordings. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. Not by mail, not through any discussion. A process server rang the doorbell at 10 in the morning while Wren was at school, handed Leona an envelope, and walked away before she finished reading his name badge. She stood in the doorway, holding the envelope for a full minute before she opened it. Fletcher was filing for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences and requesting primary residential custody of Wren on the basis that Leona had demonstrated emotional instability and an inability to maintain a stable home environment. Leona read that sentence 4 times. Emotional instability. She went to the kitchen, sat down, and did not move for 2 hours. She thought about every argument she and Fletcher had ever had in this house. The night she cried after he canceled their anniversary dinner for a client call. The morning she raised her voice because he had promised to take Wren to her recital and forgot. The evening she threw a dish towel, not at him at the counter, because she was so exhausted by the loneliness of this marriage that something in her finally snapped. Those moments felt different now. They felt like evidence. Her hands were shaking when she called the only lawyer she knew, a college roommate who had moved to Chicago and was no longer in practice. Her roommate gave her a name, Desiree Okafor, a Manhattan-based divorce attorney known for taking on cases where one spouse had significantly more financial leverage. Leona left a message. Then Fletcher came home early. He sat across from her at the kitchen table with his hands folded, his voice measured, and offered her what he called a reasonable settlement. She could keep the car. She would receive alimony for 24 months. He would retain the house because his name was first on the mortgage, and he had documentation showing he'd covered all major expenses. Wren would live primarily with him. The courts favor stability, Fletcher said, and I have evidence that you haven't always been able to provide that. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Evidence. What evidence? Leona asked. Fletcher smiled, just slightly, and said, You'll see it when the time comes. That night, Leona lay awake staring at the ceiling. She had no money of her own, no income, no documentation of anything. She hadn't worked in 9 years. She felt the walls of this house pressing inward. Desiree Okafor arrived at the coffee shop on Westport's Main Street at exactly 8:15 the following morning, 20 minutes before Leona did. She was 51, compact, with reading glasses pushed up into natural hair and a yellow legal pad she used even when a laptop was right in front of her. She had tried 52 divorce cases in the past decade. She had won 49. She ordered black coffee and waited. When Leona sat down, Desiree looked at her for a long moment before she said anything. "Tell me everything," she said. "Don't organize it. Don't make it pretty. Just talk." Leona talked for 40 minutes. Desiree took 4 pages of notes and asked 12 questions. She asked about the finances, the accounts, the mortgage, whether Leona had ever signed documents she didn't fully read. She asked about Fletcher's work, his hours, whether anyone outside the marriage had witnessed any of the arguments. She asked about Wren, her school, her teachers, who picked her up, who knew her routines. Then she asked, "Has he ever mentioned having any documentation about your behavior at home?" Leona told her what Fletcher had said. "Evidence. You'll see it when the time comes." Desiree's pen stopped moving. "Has anything in your home felt different lately?" Desiree asked. "Any behavior from him that was odd? Rearranging things, adding things to rooms he normally ignored?" Leona thought about it. Then she thought about the clock. "There's a clock," she said, "on the bookshelf in the living room. He was specific about it. Don't move it, don't touch it." Desiree wrote 2 words on her legal pad and underlined them twice. "Hidden device. I'm going to need you to do something very careful," Desiree said quietly. "Don't touch that clock. Don't mention it. Don't change anything in your routine, but I want you to call someone for me." She wrote a name and a number. Jonah Tate, Forensic Audio Associates, New Haven. "He's the best in the Northeast," Desiree said. "He can sweep your home without Fletcher knowing. If there's a recording device in that house, Jonah will find it." Leona looked at the name on the paper. Her chest went cold, then warm. Jonah Tate. She knew that name. They had gone to Northwestern together. He had been one of her closest friends for 3 years, and then life had pulled them in different directions, and she had simply lost him. Jonah Tate showed up on a Thursday afternoon while Fletcher was in Manhattan for a deposition. He was tall, unhurried, and carried 2 equipment cases like they were nothing. He had a beard he didn't have in college and gray threading through his dark hair, but his eyes were exactly the same. Careful and warm in equal measure. He stood in Leona's doorway and said simply, "Hi, Leo." She had not been called that in 15 years. "Hi," she managed. He stepped inside, set his cases down, and spent exactly 7 minutes reacquainting himself with her before he became purely professional. He explained what he was doing in plain language. He was looking for radio frequency transmitters, hardwired microphones, and passive recording devices with local storage. He would start in the rooms where conflict most commonly occurred. The living room first. He worked methodically, starting at the perimeter and moving inward. Leona sat on the stairs and watched. The clock ticked. Jonah moved past the bookshelves twice, running a small RF scanner along each shelf. On his 3rd pass, he stopped. He did not react dramatically. He simply went still the way people do when they find what they were looking for and are processing it before they speak. He turned to Leona. He held up 4 fingers. He pointed at the clock. He mouthed 2 words. "Recording device." Leona pressed both hands over her mouth. Jonah wrote on a notepad he brought with him, "Do not react audibly. We don't know if it's live transmitting. I'll scan it, but don't touch it." He spent 12 more minutes scanning the device. When he came to sit beside her in the kitchen, he kept his voice very low. "It's a passive recorder," he said quietly. Local storage only. No live transmission. It records when sound levels exceed a threshold, like voices in conversation or argument. How long? Leona whispered. Jonah looked at her steadily. Based on the model and storage capacity, 3 to 4 months, easily. Leona felt the air leave her lungs. 3 months of her life. Her frustration, her tears, her raised voice on the worst nights. All of it sitting on a device behind a clock she had been told not to touch. Can you get what's on it? She asked. Yes, Jonah said. But, Leona, there's something you need to understand before we do. He paused. They extracted the storage card that evening, carefully and without disturbing the device's positioning. Jonah had a duplicate card of the same make and inserted it before removing the original so the device would continue recording without interruption. Fletcher would never know. At Jonah's office in New Haven, they listened. The audio was clear, disturbingly clear. 93 days of life inside Leona's home, captured with precision. They listened for 3 hours. They heard arguments. They heard Leona crying. They heard her raised voice on 2 occasions and her flat, exhausted silence on many more. They heard Wren singing to herself in the hallway. They heard the ordinary sounds of a household moving through its days. And then, on day 61 of the recordings, they heard something else entirely. Fletcher's voice, late at night. Leona was asleep. She could tell from the timestamp that it was past midnight. And there was another voice, a woman's, soft, careful, close to him. Portia Langdon. They had not been careful because they believed the house was empty. They sat in Fletcher's living room, the room with the hidden recorder, and they talked. Not about love, not about the future in any romantic sense. They talked about strategy. How much more do you need? Portia asked. The February recordings are solid, Fletcher said. The one where she threw the towel, the one where she was crying at 2 a.m, the January argument. I've had them enhanced. She sounds unstable. And the January one, is it bad enough? It's bad enough if I use 40 seconds of it. He paused. I cut out the part where I told her the account was empty. Silence. Fletcher. Portia's voice was careful. It sounds like a man protecting his daughter, he said smoothly. That's all it sounds like. More silence. And what about the money? Portia asked. The joint account closes Friday. I've already moved the liquid assets. By the time she has an attorney who knows what to ask for, there won't be anything to ask for. Jonah stopped the playback. Leona sat in the dark of his office, completely still. She was not crying. She was not shaking. She was doing something she had not done in 10 years. She was thinking the way she used to think when she was a journalist. Clear and cold and exactly 1 step ahead of everyone else in the room. 3 days later, Leona arrived at Wren's school for pickup and found the car spot empty. Fletcher had already been there. He had signed Wren out 40 minutes early, citing a family appointment, and driven away before anyone thought to call Leona. She stood in the school parking lot, hands on the roof of her car, breathing in short pulls. She called Fletcher. It went to voicemail. She called Desiree. He can't do this, Desiree said. You share parental rights. Call the non-emergency police line and report it. I'm filing for an emergency custody order tonight. Leona made the call. The officer was kind and explained that since Fletcher was a legal parent, he had not technically committed a crime by taking their daughter. The courts would need to intervene. That night, Wren was at Fletcher's mother's house in Greenwich. Leona knew because Wren texted her. A single message with a heart emoji. Before Fletcher apparently took her phone for the evening, Leona sat in her kitchen in the dark. Their neighbor Sylvie Cruz appeared at the back door at 9 o'clock with a casserole dish and 2 glasses and a bottle of red wine from her own cabinet. She didn't knock loudly. She simply came in the way neighbors do when they've been paying attention long enough to know when someone needs them. "You're not eating," Sylvie said. "I'm not hungry." "I know." Sylvie set everything on the counter. "Eat anyway." They sat for a long time before Leona told Sylvie what had happened. Not just the day, everything. The device, the recordings. Fletcher's voice saying he'd cut out the part where he emptied the account. Sylvie listened without moving. When Leona finished, Sylvie set down her wine glass, folded her hands on the table, and said very quietly, "I saw Fletcher's car on the street at 11:45 on a night in December. I saw the woman who got out with him and went inside your house." Leona looked at her. "I have a security camera," Sylvie said. "I installed it after the break-in on our street last fall. It captures a wide angle, including your front walkway." She reached into her cardigan pocket and set a small USB drive on the kitchen table. "I was waiting," Sylvie said, "to know if you needed it." The kitchen was very quiet. The emergency custody hearing was held on a gray Friday morning in a family court building on White Plains Road. Fletcher arrived with 2 attorneys and a leather portfolio that he set on the table in front of him like a weapon in plain sight. He wore his best charcoal suit. His expression was concerned and composed. The face of a man worried about his daughter, performed for the judge. Leona arrived with Desiree and nothing else. She had dressed carefully, a navy blazer, pressed slacks, no jewelry except her watch. She looked exactly like what she was, a calm, clear-eyed woman who had survived something and was still standing. Fletcher's lead attorney, a man named Garrett Webb, opened by presenting what he called a pattern of emotional dysregulation that poses a risk to the child's stability. He submitted a transcript, a partial transcript, edited, of one of the audio recordings. He did not submit the audio itself, only the transcript, claiming it was a courtesy to the court to avoid unnecessarily distressing content. Leona felt Desiree's hand cover her wrist lightly under the table. "Wait." The judge, the Honorable Patricia Sun, reviewed the transcript without comment. She was 63, silver-haired, and had been on the family court bench for 19 years. She asked Webb a single question when he finished. "Counsel, this transcript, was it produced from a recording made in the marital home?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Was opposing counsel given access to the full, unedited audio recording?" Webb hesitated. "We felt the transcript was sufficient." Judge Sun looked at him over her glasses. "Counsel, was opposing counsel given access to the full, unedited recording?" A pause. "Not at this time, Your Honor." The judge's expression did not change. She made a note. "The court will require production of the complete audio files before any transcript can be entered as evidence," she said. "We will recess and reconvene in 2 weeks. In the interim, Leona Bryce will remain in the primary care of her mother at the marital residence." Fletcher's jaw tightened. Leona looked straight ahead. Garrett Webb leaned toward Fletcher and whispered something. Fletcher's hand moved under the table, a small, involuntary gesture. And for just a moment, the composure cracked. He had not expected the judge to ask for the full recordings. He had gambled on the transcript being enough. In the 2 weeks before the reconvened hearing, Fletcher tried everything. He offered Leona a new settlement, better terms, longer alimony, the house. Desiree reviewed it and advised Leona to decline. "He's scared," Desiree said. "Scared men offer more than they intended to. Let him be scared a little longer." He tried to access the recording device. He came home one evening, the first time he had been in the house since the papers were served, and went straight to the living room bookshelf. The clock was exactly where he had left it. He checked the device. The duplicate card Jonah had inserted was indistinguishable from the original. Fletcher left without knowing anything had been touched. He tried to reach Portia. She did not respond. In the days after the first hearing, Portia Langdon had walked into the managing partner's office at Bryce and Hollis and requested an immediate transfer to the firm's Chicago office. She did not explain why. She had heard enough about the case through the walls of their shared office that she understood, with perfect clarity, that she did not want to be anywhere near Fletcher Bryce when the recordings were heard in full. Fletcher was alone. Leona watched none of this directly. She learned pieces of it through Desiree, who had her own sources inside the Manhattan legal community. She spent those 2 weeks doing something else entirely. She called her former editor at The Atlantic. She told him she was working on something again. He asked what. She said she wasn't ready to say yet, but she would be. He said, "Leona, I always thought you left too soon." She sat with that sentence for a long time. She also did something she had not done in years. Every evening after Wren went to sleep, she opened a fresh document on her laptop and wrote. Not the story, not yet. Just thoughts, images, the particular shape of the decade she had lived through. She wrote without editing herself. She wrote the way she used to before she learned to make herself small. She wrote with the lights on and the curtains open. Sylvie Cruz noticed from her porch across the street and smiled. The reconvened hearing was a Tuesday. Judge Sun's courtroom was small and wood-paneled and smelled faintly of old carpet. There were 4 people in the gallery: Sylvie Cruz, who had asked Desiree permission to attend, and 3 other individuals whose presence would become relevant within the hour. Garrett Webb had spent the previous 14 days trying to prepare for this moment. He had listened to the full audio, all 93 days, and had run the calculation. The January argument still held. The February recording still held. 2 moments that, taken in isolation, could still do what he needed them to do. What he did not know, what no one on Fletcher's side knew, was what Jonah Tate had found on day 61. Desiree waited until Webb had finished presenting his selected recordings. Then she rose and said simply, "Your Honor, the defense would like to submit additional audio from the same device, produced in full compliance with your order. Specifically a recording from December 14th, beginning at 11:47 p.m. Webb looked up sharply. Fletcher went very still. The audio played through the courtroom speakers with crisp, terrible clarity. Fletcher's voice, the one where she threw the towel, the one where she was crying at 2 a.m. "I've had them enhanced. She sounds unstable." Portia's voice. "And the January one, is it bad enough?" Fletcher's voice. "It's bad enough if I use 40 seconds of it." I cut out the part where I told her the account was empty. A silence. Fletcher's voice then. "It sounds like a man protecting his daughter. That's all it sounds like." And then, "The joint account closes Friday. I've already moved the liquid assets." Judge Sun sat completely still for the full 3 minutes and 42 seconds of the recording. When it ended, she removed her glasses and set them on the bench. She looked at Fletcher. He was looking at the table in front of him. His hands were folded. He was not moving. Garrett Webb had nothing to say. He was a good attorney. Good attorneys know when there is nothing to say. "My counsel," Judge Sun said quietly, "I am going to ask your client one question." She looked at Fletcher. "Did you secretly record your wife in your marital home for the purpose of building a legal case against her, without her knowledge or consent?" Fletcher's attorney leaned to whisper to him. Fletcher did not look up. He did not answer. What happened next took 3 weeks, but it felt like a single long exhale. Judge Sun's immediate ruling was clear. All recordings made without Leona's knowledge were inadmissible. The edited transcripts were struck from the record, and Fletcher's petition for primary custody was denied pending a full investigation into his conduct. The Connecticut State Bar was notified. The managing partner at Bryce and Hollis received a call from Desiree Okafor's office the following morning. By noon, Fletcher had been placed on indefinite administrative leave. By 4 in the afternoon, his key card no longer worked. A financial forensics team, engaged by Desiree, spent 8 days reconstructing the joint accounts. They found what Fletcher had moved and where he had moved it. They found accounts Leona did not know existed. They found a pattern of transfers that began 6 months before the divorce papers were filed, which meant Fletcher had been planning this for at least half a year before Leona found that hotel receipt. They also found that some transfers had been made in Leona's name with forged authorization. That finding was forwarded to the Connecticut State Attorney's Office. Sylvie Cruz's security footage, clear, time-stamped, capturing Portia Langdon entering and leaving the Bryce home on 3 separate occasions, was submitted as supplementary evidence in the proceedings. Fletcher's attorney filed 2 motions to suppress. Both were denied. Portia, reached in Chicago, declined to make any statement through her personal attorney. She had already submitted a written declaration to the State Bar that Fletcher had encouraged her participation in matters she later understood to be improper. She was cooperating. Fletcher hired a second attorney, then a third. Each one reviewed the evidence and advised the same thing: cooperate. He didn't. He contested everything. He filed appeals. He sent Leona a written offer through his attorney, a single page, more concessions than she had thought possible 3 weeks earlier. She brought it to Desiree. Desiree read it, looked at Leona, and said, "You could take this. You'd be financially secure. It's a legitimate offer." Leona thought about it for exactly 60 seconds. "What happens to the bar investigation if I settle privately?" "Nothing," Desiree said. "That continues regardless." "Then we don't settle," Leona said. She stood up, picked up her coat, and looked out the window of Desiree's office at the Park Avenue traffic 19 floors below. The morning after she declined the settlement, Leona drove Wren to school, came home, and did something she hadn't done in 9 years. She opened her old press credentials case from the closet shelf, the one she had put there the year after Wren was born and never moved. Inside was a worn reporter's notebook, 2 dead pens, and a laminated press pass with a photo of a 30-year-old woman who looked at the camera like she owned whatever room she was standing in. Leona sat on the edge of the bed and looked at that photo for a while. Then she called her old editor at The Atlantic. "I have a story," she said. He asked what it was about. "Surveillance inside marriage," she said. "How men use technology to build legal cases against their own wives. How the courts are beginning to respond. I have primary sourcing and significant documentation." There was a pause. "That's not a story," he said. "That's a cover piece." She submitted the proposal the following day. She worked in the evenings, after Wren's bedtime, with her laptop open on the kitchen table and a mug of tea going cold beside her. The writing came back faster than she expected. Not because it was easy, but because she had 10 years of very specific experience to draw from, and she was no longer afraid of any of it. Jonah came over twice to help her verify technical details about the audio equipment and recording law. He brought takeout from a Thai place in New Haven that he claimed was better than anything in Westport, and was not wrong. They sat at the kitchen table until 11 on a Wednesday and talked the way they used to in college. About everything and nothing in the same breath. Wren, who had appeared in the doorway for a glass of water, looked between them and said, in the blunt and accurate way of 8-year-olds, "Mom, you seem like yourself again." Leona looked at her daughter. Jonah looked at his hands. "I'm working on it," Leona said. She pulled Wren in for a hug and held her for a moment longer than usual, breathing in the particular scent of her shampoo, the realness of her. Whatever Fletcher had tried to take, Wren was still here, still safe, still hers. Jonah called Leona at 7:30 on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the second hearing. "I need you to come to the office," he said. "I found something." He had been conducting a full review of all 93 days of audio as part of the court documentation process. He had listened to everything, not just the segments they had flagged, but every hour, every quiet night, every ambient recording the device had captured. On day 88, he found it. Leona sat in his office in New Haven and listened. Fletcher's voice, alone. A phone call. He must have been in the living room late at night thinking the house was empty. Leona and Wren had been at her sister-in-law's for the weekend. His voice was different when he thought no one could hear him. Quieter, more tired. He was on the phone with someone. Based on the conversation, a private investigator. And what he said in the middle of that call, in a voice that had no audience to perform for, was this: "She's not actually unstable. She's been very alone. I know that. I made her alone." A pause. The other voice, indistinct. Then Fletcher. "It doesn't matter. We don't need her to be actually unstable. We just need the recordings to make her sound like she is. That's the difference between her story and the story the court hears." The audio ended. Leona sat very still. She had heard Fletcher say terrible things on these recordings. She had heard calculation and coldness and the careful mechanics of a man dismantling his marriage strategically. But this was different. This was him, alone in the dark, admitting to no one, to the device he had placed himself, that he knew she wasn't what he was claiming. He knew. She pressed her hands flat on Jonah's desk and breathed. "This is going to the state attorney," Jonah said quietly. She nodded. "And the bar," she said. He nodded. They sat in the quiet of his office, the sound of New Haven traffic filtering up from the street below. And Leona thought about the version of herself who had sat in that living room 100 times feeling small and loud and wrong and too much. She had not been any of those things. She had been alone. And Fletcher had known it. The state attorney's case moved faster than anyone expected. The second recording, day 88, Fletcher's voice in the dark, was the piece that changed everything from a civil matter to a criminal one. Conspiring with a private investigator to manufacture false evidence for a legal proceeding crossed a line that had specific consequences in the state of Connecticut. Fletcher was charged on 2 counts. He was released on bail, but surrendered his passport. The Connecticut State Bar suspended his license. Bryce and Hollis dissolved his partnership. His name was removed from the firm letterhead within a week. The managing partner issued a statement referencing the firm's commitment to professional integrity. Fletcher did not issue any statement. The financial forensics report was complete. Every asset Fletcher had moved was traced and identified. Desiree filed a motion for full financial restitution and included a claim for legal fees that reflected the extraordinary lengths Fletcher had gone to in order to manufacture his case. The family court judge issued a final custody order. Wren would live with Leona at the marital residence. Fletcher would have scheduled visitation, supervised initially, given the pending criminal charges. The house was Leona's. The accounts were restored. The alimony calculation was revised significantly upward based on the documented dissipation of marital assets. On the day the final order was signed, Desiree called Leona while she was picking Wren up from school. "It's done," Desiree said. Leona was standing in the school pickup line, late afternoon sunlight slanting across the parking lot. Wren emerged from the double doors with her backpack bouncing and her hair coming loose from its ponytail, the exact way it always did. "Mom," Wren called, breaking into a run. Leona caught her and held on. "Done," she said into the phone. She could hear Desiree smiling. "Go be with your daughter," Desiree said. "We'll talk tomorrow." Leona tucked the phone into her pocket and walked Wren to the car with her hand on her daughter's shoulder, the solid warmth of her, the fact of her, the particular luck of her. Fletcher was somewhere across town in a rented apartment, alone, watching everything he had built dissolve. Not through any dramatic confrontation, not through a scene, but through the quiet, systematic consequence of every choice he had made. Portia Langdon had believed she had made a clean exit. Chicago was a good city for reinvention. Her new firm was smaller, quieter, and no one there knew anything about the Bryce case beyond what had appeared in a single paragraph in the Connecticut Law Tribune. She had given her declaration, cooperated, accepted the designation of tangential party, and moved on. She had not expected Leona's article. It ran in the Atlantic on a Wednesday morning, 16 weeks after the final custody order. The cover image was a photograph of a living room. Not Leona's, a staged photograph, with a single clock on a bookshelf. The headline read, "The Architecture of Silence: How Domestic Surveillance Became a Divorce Weapon." Leona did not name Portia in the article. She named no one. She was careful, precise, and entirely accurate. She wrote about the legal landscape. She wrote about the technology. She wrote about the documented pattern of one spouse using hidden recordings to build legal cases against the other, almost always targeting the more financially dependent partner, almost always a woman. She wrote about what it felt like to discover you had been listened to in your own home by someone who was supposed to love you. That section ran 400 words and was shared 2 million times in the first 48 hours. Portia read it in her office in Chicago with her door closed. She read it twice. Then she read the comment section, which she should not have done, and found that the legal community had opinions about people who had knowingly participated in a campaign to manufacture evidence against an innocent spouse. Several of those comments used the word Portia without any apparent concern for the fact that she had not been named in the article. Information travels. She called her personal attorney. Her personal attorney confirmed that she had limited exposure given her cooperation with the state investigation, but that her professional reputation in the New York and Connecticut markets had likely sustained permanent damage. Chicago might not be far enough. Portia sat with that assessment for a long time. She had chosen Fletcher because he was powerful. She had stayed because she believed power was transferable. She had cooperated because she was smart enough to see when a ship was sinking. Wren Bryce was 8 years old, and she understood more than anyone gave her credit for. She knew her father was in trouble. She knew the way the house felt different now, quieter, warmer, like someone had opened a window that had been painted shut. She knew that her mom cried sometimes after putting her to bed, and that Jonah came over and they talked at the kitchen table, and her mom laughed differently around him, more easily, like it didn't cost anything. She asked Leona one Saturday morning over pancakes, "Is Daddy a bad person?" Leona set down her spatula and sat at the table and took her time with the answer. "Your dad made bad choices," she said. "That's different from being a bad person. But the choices were very wrong, and there are consequences for them. You understand consequences." Wren thought about this. "He lied," Wren said. "Yes." "About you?" "Yes." Wren was quiet for a moment. "Why?" Leona looked at her daughter, 8 years old, clear-eyed, already carrying more emotional intelligence than most adults. "I think he was afraid," Leona said, "of losing. And when some people are afraid of losing, they do things they shouldn't." Wren nodded slowly, the way children do when they're filing information away for later. "I'm not afraid of you," Wren said. You're not Howie said." The simplicity of that sentence nearly undid Leona completely. "I know," she managed. "I always knew," Wren said with complete confidence, and went back to her pancakes. Later, when Jonah arrived and the three of them walked along the Westport waterfront in the cold, clear air, Wren ran ahead and found a perfectly flat stone and skipped it 4 times across the water. She turned around with her arms wide, grinning. "4!" she shouted. "4!" Jonah shouted back. Leona stood beside him and watched her daughter in the winter light, alive and whole and unafraid, and felt something in her chest settle into a place it had not occupied in a very long time. Fletcher Bryce pled no contest. His attorney had advised it. The recordings were airtight. Both his own voice constructing a fraudulent narrative, and worse, the second recording where he explicitly acknowledged the narrative, was false. There was no version of a trial that ended well for him. The judge sentenced him to 2 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and a fine of $60,000. He was barred from practicing law in Connecticut for 5 years, pending full reinstatement proceedings that his bar committee made clear would be lengthy and difficult. He sold his car, the Mercedes S-Class he had driven to every morning deposition, to cover legal fees. He moved to a 1-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport. He was not a monster in the cinematic sense. He was something smaller and more common. A man who had looked at his life and believed the only way to control the outcome was to control the person beside him. He had confused strategy with love for so long that he had forgotten there was a difference. He saw Wren on alternating weekends, supervised in a neutral location arranged by the family court. Wren went. She was polite. She was not warm. She was 8 years old, and she had her mother's clarity. He wrote Leona a letter, a single page, handwritten. He did not ask for forgiveness. He said simply that he knew what he had done, and that he would spend a long time understanding how he had become capable of it. Leona read it once. She did not respond. She did not hate him. Hate required a kind of ongoing attention she no longer had to spare. She had a daughter to raise, an article to follow up, and a life to rebuild that was already in pieces, beginning to take a shape she recognized. She put the letter in a folder in the back of her filing cabinet. She did not look at it again. Spring came to Birchwood Lane the way it always does in Connecticut. Suddenly, all at once, as if winter had simply gotten tired and stepped aside. Leona planted things in the front garden. She had not gardened before. It was not something she had ever thought she wanted to do. But she found herself at the nursery on a Saturday morning with Wren, coming home with flats of lavender and 2 rose bushes and a bag of soil amendment. And she spent the afternoon on her knees in the dirt, getting it right. Wren helped, then got bored, then came back, then got bored again. Jonah came by in the late afternoon with coffee and watched them for a while from the front steps. "You're doing it wrong," he said. "I know," Leona said without looking up. "I'm figuring it out." He sat on the steps, watching, saying nothing else. That was one of the things she had remembered about him. He was not afraid of silence. He filled it only when there was something worth saying. The Atlantic piece had generated a great deal of attention. A podcast reached out. A book agent emailed. 2 law journals asked if she would write about the legal dimensions in more technical detail. She was fielding everything carefully, not rushing, choosing what felt right. She was also writing something for herself, not for publication, not yet. A longer thing, a harder thing. The story of a decade told, always from the inside. She would decide later what it was for. That evening, after Wren was in bed, Leona and Jonah sat on the back porch with the lights off. The Connecticut sky doing its March thing, cold and bright and full of stars that never seemed quite as visible anywhere else. "What do you want?" Jonah asked. Not urgently, just the question, offered into the dark. She thought about it genuinely. "I want to write," she said. "I want Wren to be happy. I want a life that's actually mine." She paused. "That's enough for now." Jonah was quiet for a moment. "That's a lot," he said. She smiled. There is something the recording device never captured. It did not capture the night Leona sat on the kitchen floor after putting Wren to bed and told herself out loud to a room that wasn't listening, "I am not what he says I am." It did not capture the 3 years before that, when she would write half a page of something real and then delete it because she had stopped trusting her own voice. It did not capture the morning she found the hotel receipt and decided, without anyone telling her to be intelligent about what she knew. A recording device captures sound. It does not capture the particular quality of a woman who has been silenced deciding she has had enough. It does not capture what it costs to stay quiet when everything in you wants to fight. It does not capture the daily discipline of rebuilding a self that someone spent years convincing you was too much, too loud, too unreliable. Leona Bryce's story was not about the recordings. The recordings were just a mechanism, a tipping point, a moment when the instrument built to harm her became the instrument of her survival. The real story was what happened before and after. Before, a woman who had been a journalist, who had been relentless and precise and fearless, and who had let herself be slowly convinced that she was none of those things. After, the same woman, learning again, not dramatically, not all at once, that she had never actually stopped being them. She was 37 years old. She had a daughter who skipped stones 4 times across cold water and threw her arms wide. She had a friend who sat on her porch steps and said nothing when silence was better. She had a story in the Atlantic and a garden in the front of a house that was hers. She had a voice. She had always had a voice. Fletcher Bryce had spent 93 days recording it. In the end, it was the only thing in that house that had saved her. The women who get called too much, too emotional, too loud, are sometimes simply the women who are paying the closest attention. Listen to them. So, the story is over now. And hey, if you're still here with us at this point, I want you to know that means something. You didn't just watch a drama. Something in this story touched you. Maybe it was Leona's silence. Maybe it was the moment she decided to stop shrinking. Maybe it was just the feeling of watching someone finally get what they deserved. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Leona didn't find her strength by fighting louder. She found it by getting quiet, getting clear, and trusting what she already knew was true. Stoicism teaches us that the only thing we truly control is how we respond, not what is done to us. And that shift, that one shift in perspective, is where healing begins. If Leona's story reminded you of someone you know, maybe even yourself, please don't keep it to yourself. Share this video. Someone in your life might need to hear it today more than you realize. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and join this community. We tell stories that matter here. We'll see you in the next one. This story is a work of fiction created for storytelling and entertainment purposes. All characters, names, locations, and events portrayed in this video are entirely fictional and do not represent any real individuals, living or deceased. Any resemblance to actual persons or real-life situations is purely coincidental. The themes explored in this video, including coercive control, hidden surveillance within marriage, and financial manipulation, are presented to raise awareness and encourage thoughtful reflection. They are not intended to depict or endorse any harmful behavior. All legal and criminal consequences shown in this story are consistent with documented real-world outcomes and are presented in a responsible, educational context. This channel is committed to creating content that is honest, emotionally meaningful, and safe for our audience. We do not sensationalize harm. We tell human stories. Stories about resilience, dignity, and the quiet courage it takes to rebuild a life. Thank you for watching and for being part of this community.